Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowered to Live, the place where faith meets purpose and purpose fuels freedom. I am your host, Andrea Rose Butler, and thank you all for joining me for our series on freedom unto purpose. And today we're going to be talking about hidden wounds and freedom. Hidden wounds. Um, we're going to deep dive into this thing because this is the place of the ouch. you know I think about hidden wounds. Sometimes when you have a wound that doesn't look like a place where it doesn't look like you're injured, it always seems like that is the space that you hit the most, you touch the most, people come close to the most because you don't look injured, but people are, but you are, but it doesn't look like you are. And this is what those hidden wounds are. Those sometimes those deep wounds that that you don't appear wounded or injured. And like I said, I don't know about you, but I know that I have had injuries, and I was just like, my God, is this the only space that I can hit? And this is what happens when we have these invisible wounds. And these wounds are the things that often shape us the most, are those things that we don't want to talk about. The things that when we have those hurts, we want to hide them, we don't want people to see them. And I know for me, and I've shared it before and I've written about it. It When we have these hidden wounds and the things that we don't want to talk about, those are usually those places of shame. Those are those things that we feel like people won't love or respect us if they knew who we are and what we have done in the past. And the enemy will keep you stuck in these spaces because of fear, because you don't want anybody to know that these are hidden wounds. I know we keep them hidden. And sometimes it's not even that there are places of shame. It's there sometimes, um, they're just places that hurt, and we hurt in these areas. And sometimes we don't want to share the spaces that we are hurt. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want people to know, that we're less than perfect. And so we too hide those areas as well. But scripture tells us that in Psalms 147:3, that he heals the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. He's come to heal the brokenhearted. That's why Jesus came. He came to heal you. But I heard long ago that we can't, what is covered can't be healed. If we don't want to, we got to uncover it. Sometimes doctors will tell you, don't put a dressing on it. Let it get the air and all the other stuff. It needs that in order for it to heal properly. But we want to keep the bandage on because we want to feel protected. So hidden wounds for us also always show up, or often show up, in overthinking. Emotional triggers. That's those things again where we're trying to hide it, and we somebody gets close to it and we flinch. We get triggered, and we don't. Sometimes we don't understand. Sometimes we don't even know ourselves that we have wounds, because sometimes they've been inflicted on us, and we know sometimes we suppress them and we forget. And other times we don't realize that we've been wounded. Sometimes you ever looked, this happened to me the other day. I just looked down and I was like, where did that bruise come from? I'm like, I don't remember hitting it. I don't remember the pain. I don't remember anything. I just looked, and there was a bruise, and I was telling my daughter. She was like, yeah, I got these cuts in my hands and I don't know where they came from. I didn't feel like I was cut. But once I tried to wash my hands and it started burning, and I was just like, what happened? And sometimes we have those where we don't even recognize that we have been wounded, that we've been hurt in some way. And so we often don't know until somebody gets close to it, and we can't understand why we react the way we do, because we get triggered by things that we don't even recognize our woundedness. People pleasing is a hidden wound. We do this because we're looking for love and validation and all these different things, and so we go out of our way because we maybe been rejected, or we feel left out, and because we want to fit in, We get to that place where we want to please people with the expectation that they will love us back and they will give us those things that we need, or we feel that we need by pleasing people. And people pleasing never helps. It never serves us, and we end up even more wounded because of that, because people don't give us the validation, the approval that we think we need when we go out pleasing them. And then we find ourselves even the more wounded, and then we get more triggered, and we've got more issues going on. Sometimes those hidden wounds show up as fear of rejection. We don't put ourselves into friendship or relationships because we've been rejected before, and so we have that wound of rejection, and so it becomes something that we guard ourselves against by acting a certain way and doing things a certain way. And so we carry them often quietly. Again, we don't want to share. We don't want people to know. Sometimes, like I said, we're not even aware that we do it until we get triggered and we get like, why did you get so upset about that? And you have no idea why it happened. But they shape the way we live, the way we think, the way we move in this world, where we interact with others. And so freedom requires honesty. We've got to tell the truth. And sometimes making ourselves vulnerable to that. God wants to heal our broken spaces. He wants to bind up our wounds. He wants us to be healed, to be whole, and to walk in the liberty where he already died for us to be free. But again, the enemy's job is to keep us bound, that we can't move forward, because if we could ever be as free as we could be in Christ, he would be in so much trouble, and he knows it. So he keeps us quietly stuck, keep us bound in shame, keep us bound in fear, so that we don't step out and become the people God has called us to be. And that's why we are here on the Empowered to Live podcast, is to empower you to live the life that God created you to live. He's created you, he's given you everything that you need to live this life and to live godly. And he's already empowered you with that. And part of what that empowerment is the fact that he came to heal you, to set you free, so that you can walk boldly into the purpose and the plan that he has for you, and do it unashamed, unafraid, unapologetic, that you can be the person that he ordained you to be from the very beginning. And so hidden wounds, again, they don't show up in the way we think they should show up. And so it requires us to be honest, not to relive the pain, but allow God to heal it. And I shared, before, about my story of overcoming, child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. I've been homeless. I lived through cancer. I had an obstructed bowel. They had to remove portions of my intestine. I don't know too much information, but this is my story. These are things that I walked through, and some of those things, in particular, health issues. People can celebrate you when you've had health challenges, but it's the emotional wounds that a lot of times that triggers people themselves. When they hear, child abuse, when they hear, sexual assault, when you hear domestic violence, a lot of times people get uncomfortable in those spaces. And sometimes people may look at you differently because of those. And the enemy will hold you, because these are also places of shame that we don't always want to talk about. We don't want to, share those spaces and to talk about those things. And so the enemy keeps you trapped. And once I decided, to say, okay, I'm going to put it out there, he can no longer hold it over me, because people look at you, differently when you tell these stories. But when you tell the story and you are doing it without shame, God will show you the people who need to hear the story that you have to tell, so that they can be healed. And that's why we go through difficult seasons and we don't understand. And this is why the enemy sometimes will hold you hostage to your hidden wounds, because if he knows, if you told the truth and you were honest about what happened, then you would be free. And then others would also become free because you have told your story. And so he doesn't want you to do it. So my encouragement to you today was put it all out there and allow God to heal it. Share with a trusted person. But the first thing, God already saw it. Open it up and allow him to come in with his balm of healing and heal those places in your life that you are hurting. He wants to heal you. He wants to set you free. And so some of the things we do is we try to avoid emotional pain. We don't want to talk about the pain we had. We don't want to be re-injured, because I've had surgery, and I'm not sure if you've had to, or maybe you've had. We tend to guard the areas of pain because we don't want anybody to touch it. We don't want anybody to get close to it, and we try to protect it. But we can't always protect our wounded spaces from being touched by others, and they will come close, and they would want to get close to you. And so we try to avoid pain upon pain, but sometimes healing comes through pain. You know, Surgery, and what his doctor once told me, is controlled trauma. And sometimes when we have a wound or we have a place that needs to be healed, it needs that controlled trauma of the great physician to come in and to perform surgery. Sometimes we have broken places and they have to, it's not set properly because we guarded it. Sometimes they have to re-break it in order for it to be set correctly so that we can heal the right way. And so sometimes God is calling us to those spaces where we have to allow him to re-break those spaces. And sometimes it's about, submitting to be healed, submitting to the work that needs to take place. And yes, it's going to feel uncomfortable in the moment, but once you get past that space and you finally walk into that place of healing, and nobody tell you what to do after that moment, once you've been set free and you were walking in that place, it's a wrap for the enemy. It's a wrap for those who underestimated you in the space that you were in, you're before. But when you come into that place now and that you're healing, you're no longer avoiding emotional pain. Sometimes people become uncomfortable with your healing, and that's okay because that's not their journey. It's yours to become healed. Sometimes we minimize our past experience. We don't want to talk about it, and sometimes when people ask us about it, oh, it was nothing, or when we ask when you're hurting, and someone say, "How you doing?" "I'm fine." you know and we say in healing care that fine means feelings in need of expression, and sometimes we need to share with somebody, I'm not having a good day. I had a conversation with another one of our elders last night. We were talking after Bible study. She had called me, and I was, we were talking. She was like, "How are you really doing?" And I told her, I said, "No, there are some days that I feel like I want to give up because I'm in constant pain. And so, but I know that this is only temporary. And I know that. I said, but in the moment, I sometimes I feel like I don't want to deal with this. I don't. I was like, sometimes I just want to lay in this bed, curl up in a ball, and be like, Lord, come get me. I'm ready. But I know that he has a work for me to do. So I don't, and so in the past, I would be like, it's okay, I'm doing okay, all is doing well, and I spiritualize it, God is good, he's doing a work, he's working on me, and I'm trusting God. No, no, no. I hurt. This is the reality of where I am right now. She asks me, "How you really doing?" I'm really doing. I'm in pain, and I don't like it. And sometimes we have to get that real. We need to find those people in our lives where we can go, I hurt and I don't like it. This is what's going on. And you don't need to spiritualize our way out of the pain that we feel. Because then again, this is hiding the pain we're guarding. And we're not allowing ourselves to be healed by being real. And so we don't need to minimize the experience that we have. We don't have to minimize the space where we are right now. But again, it's important that you have those trusted people, that you can talk to. If she called to ask one question about something, and then we got to talking, and she was sharing some things, and I was just like, and I'm there too. This is how I feel right now. And when she said, "How are you really doing?" And truly, will set you free. And so that's part of healing, when we recognize that we don't have to hold it all together. We don't always have to be strong. We can share the spaces where we are, where we're hurting, and allow it to do. And so we have to come to that place because we don't want to be vulnerable. And we fear that vulnerability. We fear the fact that, people are going to use it against you. I could say, I'm a minister of the gospel. I should be telling people about why God, and that is true. But again, and I'm gonna say, people are not going to respect me if I say that I'm hurting and all these other things. But that's on them. If I share the places that I hurt and they no longer respect the fact that I'm sharing my place of woundedness, that's not our responsibility. That is now on somebody else and not me. And so I have to come to that place where I am set free, where I no longer have to hide my wounds because I'm afraid of what people are going to think about me when I share, that I am wounded. And so for you too, it's important that you again find the trusted people that you can share those spaces with and allow yourselves to become vulnerable, and don't be afraid of that, you know. And I know that people will tell your story sometimes, and but again, if you put it out there, they no longer have the power over you. So if they share it, and you're like, all right, I told it. It's like kids when your kid, your brother, your siblings used to hold you hostage. I'm gonna tell so and so that you did this, and so they blackmail you, and sometimes the enemy will do that too. He will blackmail you with your past. He'll blackmail you with your past, and he'll blackmail you with your pain. And he was just like, I'm gonna tell it, but if you tell the truth and you go ahead and spill it, he has no power over you. And so then you can be free to be vulnerable and to tell the story, to share what you've experienced. Sometimes we believe that healing takes too long. And I know that's where I am right now. It's been going on for a long time, and it got worse instead of better. And so sometimes we can like, I'm never going to be better. And so we stay stuck because what's the purpose? What's the point? And again, he can hold us hostage about, I'm never going to be better. And sometimes we have relapses, into going back to people pleasing, going back, to overthinking, falling back into that place of fear and rejection. And so, we can slip back into those spaces. But you may take 2 steps, but he may bring you 3 steps forward. Maybe that setback is to propel you into a greater place of healing, but you never know. And so, it's important that, again, that we invite God into these places, because what is hidden cannot be healed. Give a language to what you've experienced. Sometimes we just don't have the words, to say, I hurt. But God understands it, and He will put people in your life that will understand the language that you cannot speak for yourself, that you may not know how to say, this happened to me, because sometimes people say, what's wrong with you? Nothing is wrong with me. Something happened to me that brought me to the place that I'm in, but there's nothing wrong with who I am. What happened caused this dysfunction. And so, when we talk about this in informed, care, is that we talk about, what happened to bring you to this place. And so God will give people and place people in your life to give you language, or He'll give you the words to say. Extend grace to yourself. How often do we beat ourselves up that we are in the space that we're in, that we're experiencing pain? When we say, I'm never gonna do this again, I'm never gonna let somebody hurt me, I'm never gonna let, myself be vulnerable, I'm never going to people please, I'm never going to overthink, and then we start doing it, and then we start beating ourselves up. We turn ourselves into this punching bag about, you said this, and what happened? I thought you were over this, I thought you were healed, I thought this. Again, we have setbacks because we go back to what's familiar because it's easy. And so when healing becomes the familiar place, we won't rush back to pain. because now healing is the line in the sand that we come back up against. But it takes time to get there. So give yourself grace and allow the healing to be gradual. You can't rush, the process. When I first started having issues almost 2 years ago with this walking pain situation, same elder, my friend, I was telling her about it, and she goes, "You need to get you a cane or something to help stabilize you, and as you're walking or whatever, because you're having this pain." And I was like, "No, I'm fine. I don't need a cane. I don't need one." Till I fell the first time. And I was like, and I called her and I told her, I said, I fell. I told her, I said, I fell. And she goes, "See, that was pride because I told you to get a cane, but you said you didn't need one. And now what did you do?" And so I needed that honesty. When I went and I told her myself, now I have two. Now I have two canes just to make sure. I have one. I walk with one, and I have one in different places, and I move it around because sometimes I still forget that I can't walk that well. And so it's important again for me to when I told her to remove the shame from the fact that I failed, and when I told her, then it also opens me up to get the support that I needed to be able to walk properly. And the same with you. You may be wounded in places and you have this hidden wound because nobody can tell looking at me that there's something going on physically with me if you just look. But when you see me trying to walk, you know that there's something wrong. And sometimes, people see you and you don't look wounded. And so therefore you don't get the support that you need to help you on your journey. And sometimes support is offered and we think we don't need it, like I did, until we hurt ourselves even more. And then then we reach for the support that we need. And then it's also important to share the fact that, I went and told her, I called her up as soon as I got my pride and my life together, and took some Tylenol, and I picked up the phone and I said, "Guess what? You were right. I needed support and I didn't have it, and I fell." And she was, "Are you okay?" Whatever. And then she goes, "But then I tell you that you may need support." And I'm encouraging you today that you may need support. Whether it's a trusted friend, whether it's a coach, whether it's a counselor, pastor, we can go to God, but sometimes we need that physical support of a person, to be able to hold us up, like Aaron and Hur held up Moses' arms when he was getting tired. We need that kind of support in our lives, to help us when we are struggling, when we need help. There are certain things that I used to could do that I can't do right now, and I need help. So I have to reach out to my kids. I'm like, "Hey, I need help." And so that may be you to say, "Hey, I need help. I need help with these hidden wounds that I have. You know, Help me get connected, and find where that trusted person is." Start with prayer, asking God to show you that trusted friend, that trusted person that you can go to, that won't go ahead and share, put your stories in the street, but will walk alongside you and help you, as you are, journeying along the way. And so that is important that you have that. And so I'm going to challenge you today. What have you been carrying silently that needs to be acknowledged? Now, what do you need to acknowledge that's happening to you, that happened in the past? What are some things that you're silently carrying that you know? This past weekend, and I didn't share this in the beginning, we have an event here in Mexico through my foundation, we call Her Table, which is health empowerment and restoration. And we did a wonderful exercise about, with this session, we talked about mental health and, anxiety, stress, depression, burnout. And so one of the exercises that we did was to write on a piece of paper something that you've been carrying that has been that's been heavy for you, that no one else knows about. And so they wrote it on the paper. And then the second part of the exercise was to take it, to tear it into pieces, and then throw it away. and the collective sigh that went through the room of that releasing, of that letting go, and so that's for you. Maybe you're carrying something silently that has been heavy for you. Write it down, pray through it, tear it up, and throw it away. And the release of doing that is probably the first step in your journey towards healing that silent pain, that hidden wound, to finally, rip the bandage off that you've been hiding, that bandage has gotten dirty and covered, and that the wound has been trying to heal, but we won't allow it to be seen in the air. And sometimes this may be your first step and bringing it into the open and said, this is a hidden wound that I have. Write it down, acknowledge it. Don't say, well, I'm hurting, but it's nothing. No, if it's wounding, if it's hurt, if it's a dysfunction in the body, that means it's a dysfunction in your spirit, it's a dysfunction in your soul that has to be addressed so it can become functioning the way it should be. It needs to be in alignment with God and with His Word and how He created you, so you can walk fully in your purpose. And so that may allow you to be healed and for you to step out. And so for my writers out there, so you need to journal. What wounds have you hidden or minimized? And how have they shaped your behavior? And what would healing look like for you? So, what wounds have I hidden or minimized? And how have they shaped my behavior? Are you people pleasing? Are you overthinking? You know, are you walking guarded? People can't get close to you because you're so afraid that you're constantly protecting yourself, putting up shields and walls. And sometimes you may not even be aware that you have something going on, and so you may need to sit in prayer, say, God, you know I see these behaviors, or people may have mentioned these behaviors to me that don't appear to be normal, but they've been such a part of my life that I don't even recognize the difference now. So help me, show me what they are, and then help me to realign and reshape my behaviors, of the things that I have done that are unhealthy. Help me to straighten those things up. And He will. Again, He came to bind up the brokenhearted and to heal our wounds. He wants to heal the wounds. He wants to heal all the places that we are hurting. And so what would healing look like for you? What freedom, what liberty would you have if you were fully healed emotionally, spiritually, if you were set free from all the things that have been holding you down, the things that you have worn that don't belong to you, but they have shaped you, and you've worn it so long they become tattered, but you're afraid to take them off. Today's the time for you to throw them off, just like they threw away those papers after they ripped them up. That freedom of casting off those old garments that no longer serve you. They don't fit anymore. You've grown out of them, and it's time for you to let them go. And that's what He wants to do for you today. He wants you to set that free. So He wants you to be healed. And healing is not weakness. Being injured is not a weakness. It doesn't diminish who you are and the power that you still have, even in that state of brokenness. That God can still use you. He still wants to use you. You still have purpose. That purpose is still there. But in order for you to fully walk in that freedom, you've got to be healed. You've got to be healed. He wants you to be emotionally, spiritually well. Sometimes we can still do stuff, when we're physically down, because, I've got these canes. I'm still moving and still pushing. I'm still moving forward. Some things may take me a little bit longer, but I'm still pushing. I'm still moving forward, and I'm still acknowledging the hurt. And as I acknowledge the hurt, I'm still moving because I know that there is more on the other side of this. I'm going to keep pushing and keep going. So next week, we're going to be talking about healed with a purpose. So now that you have gotten to that place, you've acknowledged the wounds that you have, and you're walking through that healing process. and you're on your way and you're on your healing journey, why does God want you healed? He's got purpose for you. And we're going to talk about what that is, what that looks like for us to be healed with a purpose. Again, we can be physically broken and God can still use us. But when we're emotionally stuck, emotionally stunted, spiritually stuck, spiritually stunted, spiritually wounded, we can't move past that. He can't, not that he can't use us, but he wants to use us in a greater way. And so allow him to touch and to heal you today so that he can bring you into that place of total healing so that your purpose will be fully realized and you can walk out in the knowledge that you are strong, that you are powerful, that you are mighty, and that God and that you are healed. And again, you are healed with and for a purpose, just like you are here for and with a purpose. And so I want to thank you all for joining me this evening for another episode of Empowered to Live. Remember that God has given us everything that we need to live this life and to live godly. So go out and be healed today because that's what God wants for your life. You'll have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all next week as we talk about healed with a purpose. Bye bye.